Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. I'm Sergeant Paul Maneg with the Manitoba RCMP. Je suis Sergeant Paul Maneg avec la GRC du Manitoba. We acknowledge we are gathered on Treaty 1 territory and that the Manitoba is located on the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Dakota, Dene, and Natho nations. That Manitoba is located on the homeland of the Red River Métis, and northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. We respect the spirit and intent of treaties and treaty making and remain committed to working in partnership with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. Nous reconnaissons que nous sommes rassemblés sur le territoire du traité numéro 1 et que le Manitoba est situé sur les territoires visés par des traités et les terres ancestrales de diverses nations, à savoir les Anishinaabe, les Anishinaabe, les Dakota, les Dene et les Natho. Nous reconnaissons que le Manitoba est situé sur la terre natale de la nation métisse de la Rivière-Rouge et que le nord du Manitoba comprend le territoire qui était et demeure le territoire ancestral des Inuits. Nous respectons l'esprit et l'intention des traités et de leur élaboration et nous engageons à travailler en partenariat avec les Premières Nations, les Métis et les Inuits dans un esprit de vérité, de réconciliation et de la collaboration. Thank you for all coming today. Merci d'être venu aujourd'hui. With me today are Superintendent Rob Lasson, Officer in Charge of Manitoba RCMP Major Crime Services, General Counsel Chris Vanderhooft, Manitoba Prosecution Services, Staff Sergeant Sean Grunwald, and Sergeant Jana Amaro from RCMP Major Crime Services. Je suis accompagné aujourd'hui du surintendant Rob Lasson, officier responsable du service des crimes majeurs de la GRC au Manitoba, l'avocat général Chris Vanderhooft, service des poursuites du Manitoba, sergent d'état-major Sean Grunwald et sergent Jana Amaro, les deux du service des crimes majeurs de la GRC. Today, Chris Vanderhooft will be speaking on the results of the investigation into the Carberry collision. Superintendent Rob Lasson will provide further investigational details in relation to the collision, and Staff Sergeant Sean Grunwald and Sergeant Jana Amaro will be available to answer any questions from the media. Aujourd'hui, Chris Vanderhooft parlera des résultats de l'enquête sur la collision de Carberry. Le surintendant Rob Lasson fournira des détails supplémentaires sur l'enquête relative à la collision et sergent d'état-major Sean Grunwald et sergent Jana Amaro seront disponibles pour répondre aux questions des médias. Following the remarks, both Chris Vanderhooft and Superintendent Rob Lasson will also be available for questions. Après les allocations de Chris Vanderhooft et du surintendant Rob Lasson, les participants auront l'occasion de poser des questions. There is a microphone located to my left for the media to answer the questions so that it's picked up. Thank you. Sir?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming today. It has been a year since the tragic day when so many lives were lost. I stood here a year ago and spoke to you all about a complex investigation that was ensuing that would take time to ensure that the RCMP got the most accurate answers possible for the public. Firstly, and most importantly, I want to acknowledge and thank the public and the community, and importantly, the families of the victims for their extreme patience and understanding during this time. I acknowledge it was very difficult. After countless hours of interviews, precisely examining evidence, generating and analyzing expert reports, and following up on every investigative avenue that we could, we were able to provide a very comprehensive investigative package to the Crown Attorney. I'm here today to say that based on the Crown's review, no charges are being authorized in relation to the collision that occurred. Our investigative team and family liaison team from the RCMP had the opportunity to travel with the Crown Attorney to Dauphin yesterday. They met with the families and provided an in-person update in regards to the results and answered any questions that the families had. Like the families, today will bring upon varied emotions. All of this is very understandable. As investigators, we hope to provide the why of what happened, and that is why we do what we do. But in this case, we cannot say why the bus proceeded into the intersection that day when it was unsafe to do so. I can tell you that we looked into all aspects of the collision, and I'm confident that we gathered all evidence that was available and we recovered it. Unfortunately, due to the circumstances of this tragedy, not all evidence that we usually would seek was attainable. For example, in a typical investigation, normally we would want to speak to all witnesses in a tragedy as such. However, unfortunately, many of the key witnesses were on the bus that day and perished at the scene. We did recover the cell phone from the bus driver, and we were able to confirm that there were no calls and no text messages incoming or outgoing at the time of the collision. Very importantly, early on, we were able to pull evidence from the semi-truck dash cam, which we have previously discussed. This dash cam enabled us to gather that evidence and showed that the bus proceeded when it was unsafe. This was a very key piece of evidence and a turning point to provide public with immediate answers. We reviewed multiple expert reports that were generated, and all the opinions indicated that blind spots would be a significant issue in this case. However, every vehicle, as we know, have blind spots, and it is still the driver's responsibility to ensure that they can proceed safely. So while a very relevant fact, not necessarily responsible for the collision that day. As mentioned previously, unfortunately, police are unable to speak to the bus driver, nor do we anticipate being able to speak to him based on medical reasons. Therefore, we do not have the driver's account about what happened that day to help us understand his reasoning or actions of proceeding into the intersection. I need to say this was a very tragic collision, and it happened because of a choice made by the bus driver. However, we cannot prove that that choice that day was a result of anything criminal. I know many of you have had a lot of questions that we have not been able to answer, and because of the ongoing investigation. We are still somewhat limited due to privacy concerns, and I would appreciate further understanding on that. However, the team commander of the entire investigation, as well as the primary investigator, are here today to answer more in-depth questions that you may have pertaining to the investigation. The RCMP in Manitoba recognizes that this tragedy severely rocked all of Manitoba and had a profound effect on all of us. We understand that everyone wants to know what investigators found out about the events that day. That is why myself, the investigative team, and the Crown Attorney are here today. My thoughts continue to be with the community of Dauphin, and importantly with the families who lost so much that day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Bonjour à tous. Merci à tous d'être venus aujourd'hui. Un an s'est écoulé depuis ce jour tragique où tant de vies ont été perdues. Il y a un an, je vous ai tous parlé d'une enquête complexe qui prendrait du temps pour nous permettre d'obtenir les réponses les plus précises possibles. Je tiens à remercier la communauté et les familles pour leur patience et leur compréhension pendant cette période. Après d'innombrables heures d'entretien, d'examen précis des preuves, d'élaboration et d'analyse de rapports d'experts et de suivi de toutes les pistes d'enquête possibles, nous avons été en mesure de fournir un dossier d'enquête complet à la Couronne. Sur la base de l'examen de la Couronne, aucune accusation n'est autorisée en relation avec la collision. Notre équipe d'enquêteurs et de liaison avec leurs familles des services des crimes majeurs de la GRC et le procureur de la Couronne se sont rendus à Dauphin hier. Ils ont rencontré les familles, les ont informés en personne des résultats de l'enquête et ont répondu à leurs questions. Comme les familles, il y aura des émotions variées et certains seront très en colère. Tout cela est compréhensible. En tant qu'enquêteurs, nous espérons donner le pourquoi. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous faisons ce que nous faisons. Mais dans ce cas, nous ne pouvons pas dire pourquoi l'autobus s'est engagé avant qu'il ne soit sûr de le faire et s'est engagé dans le carrefour. Je peux vous dire que nous avons examiné tous les aspects de la collision et je suis certain que toutes les preuves disponibles ont été récupérées. Malheureusement, en raison des circonstances de cette tragédie, toutes les preuves n'ont pas pu être obtenues. Par exemple, nous devrions normalement pouvoir parler à tous les témoins, mais beaucoup d'entre eux ont péri sur les lieux de la collision. Nous avons retrouvé le téléphone portable du chauffeur de l'autobus et nous avons pu confirmer qu'il n'y avait pas d'appel ou pas de message texte en entrée ou en sortie au moment de la collision. Il est important de noter que nous avons pu obtenir des preuves du semi-remorque, à savoir la caméra du tableau de bord, dont nous avons déjà parlé, qui montre clairement que l'autobus a roulé alors qu'il n'y avait pas de sécurité. Il s'agit d'un élément de preuve essentiel. Nous avons examiné plusieurs rapports d'experts et tous les avis indiquent que les angles morts constituent un problème important. Cependant, tous les véhicules ont des angles morts et il incombe toujours au conducteur de s'assurer qu'il peut circuler en toute sécurité. Il s'agit donc d'un fait pertinent, mais pas nécessairement responsable de la collision. Malheureusement, nous ne pouvons pas parler au chauffeur de l'autobus et nous ne prévoyons pas de le faire pour des raisons médicales. Par conséquent, nous ne disposons pas du récit du chauffeur de l'autobus pour nous aider à comprendre son raisonnement ou ses actions. Il s'agit d'une collision tragique qui s'est produite en raison d'un choix fait par le chauffeur de l'autobus. Cependant, nous ne pouvons pas prouver que ce choix était le résultat d'un acte criminel. Je sais que beaucoup d'entre vous ont posé de nombreuses questions auxquelles nous n'avons pas pu répondre en raison de l'enquête en cours. Nous sommes encore quelque peu limités pour des raisons de protection de la vie privée. Cependant, le chef d'équipe de l'enquête et l'enquêteur principal sont ici pour répondre à vos questions. La GRC reconnaît que cette tragédie a bouleversé les Manitobains et a eu un effet profond sur beaucoup d'entre nous. Nous comprenons que vous souhaitez savoir ce que nous avons découvert sur les événements de cette journée. C'est pourquoi moi-même et l'équipe d'enquêteurs sommes ici aujourd'hui. Mes pensées vont toujours aux familles et la communauté de Dauphin qui ont tant perdu ce jour-là. Merci. I'll now invite General Counsel Chris Vanderhooft to the podium.
Good morning. Oh, of course. First of all, thank everyone for being here today. Thank you, Sergeant Meneg, Superintendent Lasson. We have provided, in addition to our attendance here today, a clear statement that will be available to the media. So you can review that after the meeting today, and if you have questions, of course, we're here to answer them. First of all, we want to express our condolences to all of the families involved in this matter and thank them for the time they took yesterday to meet with us and to ask questions and have some dialogue. It was obviously a difficult thing for them to go through. We also want to express our sincere appreciation to all the first responders, medical staff, and RCMP that attended the scene and dealt with the matter from the beginning, and also for the thorough and comprehensive investigation that followed and eventually came to the Crown's office for an opinion. So we are grateful for all of those things. In terms of the circumstances of this offense, I'm going to provide some information from what is our clear statement. On June 15, 2023, the driver of the bus employed by Quality Care Transit was transporting 24 passengers from Dauphin to the Sandhills Casino near Carberry. 17 passengers died due to that collision. The bus driver was hospitalized with a traumatic brain injury. At 11:32 a.m. on June 15th, the bus driver was traveling southbound on Highway 5. As he approached the intersection of Highway 1, he came to a stop at the stop sign to allow westbound traffic to pass. He then proceeded across the westbound lanes of Highway 1 into the median that had a yield sign. He continued across the eastbound lanes of Highway 1, driving across the path of the oncoming semi-truck. The semi-truck had dashcam video. The video was consistent with the description provided by the driver. He attempted to avoid the collision, but the bus driver did not appear to see the semi-truck coming. The driver of the semi-truck was not speeding, driving erratically, and clearly had the right-of-way. Transport Canada and the RCMP collision reconstructionist conducted investigations into the collision and determined that the bus driver would have had 3 separate blind spots that contributed to the bus driver not seeing the semi-truck. The 10-second video obtained from the semi-truck, along with the scene evidence and examination of the bus, demonstrated that the right front corner of the bus passenger cabin clearly played a significant role in the collision. Specifically, the bus left the stop sign to cross the westbound lanes of Highway 1 10.5 seconds prior to the collision. At this time, the semi-truck was 318 meters west of the impact location and completely within the area obscured by the structure between the passenger loading door and the small right window. The bus passed the yield sign in the center median approximately 3.5 seconds prior to the impact. At this point, the truck was approximately 100 meters west of the impact location and remained hidden in the same obscured area between the passenger loading door and the small right window. The bus then traversed the solid yellow line on the left side of the eastbound through lanes approximately 2 seconds prior to the impact, when the semi-truck was approximately 52 meters west of the impact location. Visibility of the truck remained in the same obscured area. The RCMP collision analyst confirmed the information that there were blind spots and that the bus had only been in operation with Quality Care Transit for about a month prior to the collision. There were no mechanical defects with the bus. One witness on the bus said that the bus driver was on his cell phone prior to the collision. RCMP investigators obtained search warrants for the phone and determined that the phone was not in use at the time of collision. The last outgoing phone call from the bus driver to the dispatcher was at 11:27:52 a.m. While there had been calls to his dispatch prior to the collision, there is no evidence that the phone was in use at the time of the collision or just prior to the collision. In terms of the medical evidence related to the bus driver, the RCMP also obtained medical records shortly after the offense and in the spring of 2024, after lengthy treatment and hospitalization of the bus driver. Those records confirmed that the bus driver had a major brain injury, underwent substantial rehabilitation efforts, and remains unable to care for himself or function without assistance in the community. He is not in a position to make his own decisions regarding his personal care or finances, and his condition is unlikely to improve based on the medical evidence that was obtained. In terms of the Crown's role in assessing any particular criminal offense, whether it's a fatality, a highway traffic related fatality, or homicide related, there are two things that the Crown must consider. We apply a two-part test to determine whether charges will be approved and a prosecution initiated. Crown Counsel must independently, objectively, and fairly measure all available evidence to determine these two things. First, whether there is a reasonable likelihood of conviction, and if so, second, whether the public interest requires a prosecution. The first arm of this test requires prosecutors to bring all of their professional skills to bear on making a determination of whether a conviction to the criminal law standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt is the more likely outcome, if the matter was to proceed to trial. The second arm requires prosecutors to recognize that many societal values impact the criminal justice system. Prosecutions advance the important societal interest in the deterrence, denunciation, and punishment of criminal conduct. The potential charges that were considered in this case were dangerous operation of a motor vehicle causing death and dangerous operation of a motor vehicle causing bodily harm. The RCMP first submitted this file for charge assessment on January 3rd, 2024. The assessment of this matter was delayed by factors including ongoing investigative steps by the RCMP and substantial additional information provided to Crown Counsel during the review period, factual complexity, and legal complexity. The relevant law for dangerous driving is as follows. Dangerous operation of a motor vehicle is made out when a person drives in a manner that is dangerous to the public, having regard to all the circumstances, and the driving constitutes a marked departure from the standard of a reasonable person in the driver's circumstances. In a case involving a bus driver, the driving would entail a marked departure from the standard of a reasonable bus driver with that driver's experience and training. Momentary inattention does not constitute dangerous driving. The act of dangerous operation of a motor vehicle is driving in a manner dangerous to the public in all of the circumstances. The focus must be on the risks created by the driver's manner of driving and not on the consequences of the driving. In this case, to make out the offense of dangerous operation of a motor vehicle, the Crown would have to show that the bus driver's actions were a marked departure from the standard of a reasonable person in similar circumstances. At the time of the collision, it is apparent from all of the evidence that the driver, due to the blind spots in that vehicle, and when he may have looked in that direction, did not see the semi-truck traveling eastbound. He did not hit the brakes, nor did he speed up to avoid the oncoming semi-truck. In the present circumstances, the bus driver stopped at the stop sign as he approached the westbound lanes of Highway 1. He then proceeded into the median where there was a yield sign and continued through the eastbound lanes of traffic. It is apparent from the dash cam video of the semi-truck that the bus driver did not see an oncoming vehicle in a matter of seconds. Therefore, the Crown would not be able to prove that the momentary inattention of the bus driver or failure to see the semi-truck, combined with the blind spots in the vehicle, constituted a marked departure from the standard of care of a reasonable bus driver in these circumstances. The available evidence would support the conclusion that the bus driver's conduct was not a marked departure from the standard of care in all of the circumstances. As there is no reasonable likelihood of conviction, there are no grounds to lay a criminal charge in this case. To conclude, no charges have been authorized in relation to the bus driver's involvement in this collision. Even if there was a basis to proceed under the Highway Traffic Act for proceeding when unsafe to do so, the public interest does not militate in favor of any charge. As I mentioned earlier, the bus driver involved in this incident has suffered a traumatic brain injury that requires assisted living. He has no recollection of the incident, making it impossible to interview him. While the Crown is certainly aware of the consequences of this mass casualty and the tragedy that the families have had and continue to deal with, there is no public interest in proceeding against the bus driver, and we have therefore decided not to authorize criminal charges. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'll now invite the media that may have questions to approach the microphone. I'll have Staff Sergeant Grunwald and Sergeant Jana Amaro available for any investigative questions, as well as Superintendent Rob Lasson. So please, if you have any questions, please approach the mic. Thank you.
Josh Crabb with CBC Manitoba. I'm not sure who's best to address this, but anyone who maybe met with the families yesterday and shared with them this news, what was their reaction to this decision?
Good morning, everyone. First off, give me one moment here. My name's Staff Sergeant Sean Grunwald. I was the operational team commander for this incident. To my right is Sergeant Jana Amaro, who was the lead investigator, primary investigator. We both attended yesterday. First off, just for the incident itself, I want to thank the first responders, the police, EMS, fire department, STARS that were the first on scene. They brought comfort to those that needed it. They saved lives, and they secured evidence that was critical for the investigation. I want to thank the entire investigative team. They did a phenomenal job with the hours that they put into this. I also want to thank the families of those affected for their patience and let them know that from the investigative team they have our sympathies for their losses and we continue to think about them almost every day. As for your question, we met with the families yesterday. We went into great detail. Mr. Vanderhooft met with them and provided basically the same information. We understand that there's going to be different emotions regarding this. We feel that the families understood the situation, and we felt that they were, even though some may not agree, that's okay. I believe that they feel that we put every ounce in to get them the answers that they were looking for.
Just one follow-up for Chris Vanderhooft, if possible. Would there be grounds then for an offense under the Highway Traffic Act? And you just mentioned that it wouldn't be in the public interest, but there could be an offense here.
As I said, we aren't authorizing charges under either the Criminal Code or the Highway Traffic Act. And the comment I made was that even if there were grounds under the Highway Traffic Act to lay charges, this isn't a case where we would, given the circumstances the driver is now in.
Eric from the Free Press. Was the driver tested for impairment in any way? Is his blood, I mean, whether legal prescription drugs or otherwise?
Yes, and there was no drugs or alcohol present.
Excusez-moi, bonjour. Je voudrais des réactions en français, s'il vous plaît, si c'est possible. J'aimerais avoir les circonstances de cet accident, les éléments dont vous avez pu identifier et qui démontrent que le chauffeur du bus n'a pas prêté attention à ces angles morts. S'il vous plaît.
I guess in terms of the friends questions, if you'd like to approach me after, I can best provide that information
That's
and then
fine.
speaking with my colleagues.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Morgan Majeski with City News. First of all, thank you so much for taking our questions today. I guess this would be for the Crown, Mr. Vanderhooft, if you would be able to answer this question. With the fact that there's no charges being recommended, was there any sort of recommendation put forward by the Crown in terms of examining things like driver training or even potentially the intersection for hazards? Was that something that the Crown made any recommendations to the province in regards to, or anything even examined?
No, the short answer. The driver training issues are really not at play here. The driver was properly licensed to be driving that vehicle. So that wasn't a particular concern. In terms of the intersection, no, we don't make recommendations on anything other than our rule, which is to advise on whether charges will be laid under the Criminal Code or any other act.
Thank you for that. And just to follow up for you, sir, you know, this is, I think a lot of people would say, maybe the end or the beginning of an end of a very painful chapter for the province. You know, for you as the Crown Prosecutor and the office, as you were reviewing that evidence, you know, maybe just talk a little bit about the weight that was kind of on your office's shoulders as you were really kind of taking on this task and you know, doing this job.
You know, I think it likely pales in comparison to the job that the investigators and all the first responders and medical staff had here. We're in a position to answer and give advice, you know, from a relatively sterilized view of things. So I'll start by saying that. But we treat these things very seriously all the time, and it's part of what we do. We're accustomed to giving opinions on fatalities, and sometimes, you know, the answer isn't necessarily what people want to hear, and we know that.
Are you concerned about precedent in the sense that this might kind of set case law for similar crashes, in the sense that blind spots or things like that might be used in the future? Is that a concern at all?
No. Each case of dangerous driving is decided on its specific factual circumstances. And this particular incident, as I say, and as we've provided in the clear statement, had a number of factual things that took place that would raise a reasonable doubt about the offender's driving conduct amounting to criminal conduct. So, no, we aren't terribly concerned about precedential value of this particular decision because each case is decided on its own factual matrix.
And I have one more follow-up, I believe, for Sergeant Amaru. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Amaro, yeah.
Amaro. Sergeant, when it comes to, I guess, the decision that was delivered, I'm sure that you were briefed on this much earlier than we were, but what was your thoughts and reaction to hearing that there would be no criminal charges? Did that come as a surprise, or was that something that you expected?
Yeah, I would say that it was not unexpected. We were in close contact with the Crown's office throughout the process, and no, it was not a surprise given the information and the evidence that we have in the investigation.
And in terms of, I guess, just your involvement in the scope of this investigation, and this will be my final question, my apologies, have you ever seen a file of this magnitude come through the RCMP in Manitoba, but frankly across the country as well? I know people always make that parallel to Humboldt, but for you, have you ever seen a file like this come through the RCMP in Manitoba?
No, I have not. It's a different type of investigation than we're typically involved in our major crime unit. But given the magnitude of the information that we would be receiving, that's why our major crime unit got involved to implement our major case management system. Thank you.
This one's for Mr. Vanderhooft. Brittany Hobson at the Canadian Press. Given the driver's condition, if it was different, would that have affected if he would have laid charges or not?
That's difficult to predict, but based on the physical evidence, based on the scene evidence that was obtained, based on the dash cam video, it's unlikely that would change the opinion in regards to the criminal code offense. So no, I think is the short answer to that as well. It's a factor to consider in assessing the public interest in this matter, for sure, his medical condition, but it isn't the factor that led to the decision. The main factor is, as I say, the constellation of events that took place leading up to the collision.
And then for either of the investigators, just wondering, kind of to follow up on Morgan's last question, but if you could just kind of go through, I mean, it's been a year-long investigation, or not quite a year long, but just kind of, the details of that, like how thorough you guys went through this, how many people are involved, just kind of if you could lay that out for us.
I can start with the day that it occurred. It's a day that most of us that were there, I attended the scene along with Sergeant Amaral. I don't think we're ever going to forget that day. It was shocking to us, especially even though that we're investigators that have been to many different types of scenes. It was very busy. It was very overwhelming at first. There were many first responders on the scene, and we still had lots of traffic going by in opposite directions. When the sheer size of the tragedy registered on us, our team kicked in, and we knew that we had to do what we do in most of our investigations. We were there about 2 or 3 hours after the incident. We were very impressed by the efforts of the first responders that were on scene. They had controlled the chaos and allowed us to do what needed to be done. It's hard to go back to that day. We knew family wanted answers, whether the family member was alive or dead at that time. We also knew we couldn't give them the answers as quickly as they wanted and that they needed. That was one of the hardest things we dealt with. As the year went on, we collected as much evidence as we could. I'm proud of our efforts. I'm proud of what we accomplished. I don't believe we let any stone unturned that was out there. So it was a long process, but it was a process that needed to be done.
For Mr. Vanderhooft, Sam Brownell from CJOB, just because of the uniqueness of this investigation and the scale of it, at what point does do RCMP reach out to the Crown and your office becomes involved in this case?
It really depends. In this case, we received a disclosure package in January of 2024 when they had much of the investigation completed. And it might be different in a different case. If an arrest had been made right away, then we would receive information sooner. But it just depends on the case. There are some situations where we're involved much earlier, providing advice on various issues that can come up in an investigation. But in this case, we received the bulk of the information in January of 2024, and there were only a few things in terms of additional disclosure and discussion that we had after that. So that's not unusual.
Mr. Vanderhooft, how many Crowns were involved in examining that package and making this determination?
So we follow our usual protocol for any driving fatality in our case. So while the decision certainly is, and the opinion formed is by myself, that's always with a team of other people involved. Some people from our Driving Offenses Committee also had an opportunity to review this, as well as our usual process to make sure that we meet and discuss it with upper management to decide that we're doing what is appropriate in any given fatality. So, there's for sure a number of other people have also looked at it, but it's normal that it would be assigned to one person for review. Yes.
How long did that meeting in Dauphin last yesterday?
I think we started at about 1 and we were done just after 3, so a couple of hours. Some people appeared in person and some family members appeared via Teams, but we were able to get most people at that meeting.
And I know we've all kind of asked the same question, but I mean, after you walked out of that meeting, I mean, what did you feel?
These are tragic situations, and whether it's in any collision that results in fatalities, they're difficult for people to deal with because they're sudden losses, and the families struggle for answers, and that's always hard. So we obviously see that and are aware of it, and we acknowledge that. But that is, part of what we do in meeting with these families.
And just one more quick question. When did this decision finally be made? Was it the past couple of days, or?
Well, the crystallization of the decision would have been in the last couple of weeks, where we were able to have the necessary meetings that we needed to have to make sure, and that's fairly normal. And then we, again, we're in contact with the RCMP to make sure that we would be able to meet with the families before making that announcement.
I think this one is for Sergeant Amaro, if possible. There was a yield sign there, and maybe I've just missed it, but did the driver yield in an acceptable way or long enough? And can you just speak to what the actual law requires of people at a yield sign like that?
The driver appeared, from watching the dash cam video, the driver definitely stopped at the stop sign, then proceeded to the yield, and it looked like he was in a position to be able to stop, but then proceeded through the intersection, not seeing the semi-truck.
So the bus did stop at the yield sign,
Sorry,
fully stop?
no, it did not.
Didn't.
It did not.
kept
It
going.
appeared as though it would. That's what the semi-driver believed as well, but no, he did not.
And so is that allowed? Is that when we're allowed to roll through a yield sign like that?
If it was, if the traffic hadn't been coming, it would have been acceptable.
This question probably applies to each of you differently, but this has been a long process, as we've said, a difficult process. What happens after today? What's next?
Do you want to answer
not sure how to answer that in regards to the investigation. I guess this ultimately concludes it. We give the answers that we can to everybody. For those of us that were part of it, it'll probably never conclude, especially for the families. That's probably never going to conclude, but I hope this puts some people's mind and answers questions that people have.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That'll conclude the press conference. If anyone's got any questions, please come see us afterwards. Thank you.